Awesome. I'm recording now. So, what are some of the primary values that you focus on? Like, what are the ethics that are central to your leadership of KMR?
Well, that's a great question. And we focus on a few key values at KMR. One is um, it's really important for us that each member of the team is committed to um, um, achieving and advancing owner value. So there are owners of KMR that have important um, objectives and goals that they would like to achieve with their company, and we need everybody to be committed to those goals primarily. Sometimes you have some of your team that have their own goals and objectives, and they need to be secondary to the goals and objectives of the company and the owners of the company. Another value that's important to me is that people come with a can-do attitude. They're, the Kealakekua Mountain Reserve is a large ranch project. It's nearly 10,000 acres, and it means that there are a lot of unpredictable things that happen on the ranch that need to be addressed and resolved or advanced if there are opportunities by the team. And if people decide there's only certain things that they're willing to do, then the burden of advancing or resolving or addressing being unpredictable things that come up, will fall on fewer members of the team and create disproportionate burdens. And so we really need everybody on the team to be can-do focused, and that starts with me as the general manager at the top. And there have been times, for example, when we've had fires on the ranch, and it'd be easier for me just to delegate that to somebody else to deal with, but that'll burn people out, no pun intended, pretty quickly. And so each of us take turns, managing the fire. And I remember that one time, it fell to me to monitor the fire, because these open land fires, they burn for months and months. It's impossible to really put them completely out. And so they have to burn themselves out. And you patrol the perimeter to make sure that they're not jumping the perimeter. And it fell to me on early Christmas morning to be responsible for the patrol. And we were up there, 5 a.m, and I found that the fire had jumped the perimeter. And so I spent, a good chunk of my Christmas day working on putting out that fire. And I didn't think that I was doing anything more or less than anyone else. Everybody else had taken their turn and had resolved those issues in the past, and I was just doing my part. Another important value that we have is integrity, and it just doesn't work in a business like ours to not have accurate communication from each other. It wastes a lot of time, and it's so much more valuable to have somebody just tell you what's happening than for you to spin your wheels trying to resolve a problem that has been, some of the aspects of it have been fabricated. And so we really want people to communicate with clarity and be completely transparent on what's happening. And we also need people to be honest in the way that they interact with the assets of the ranch. In a prior ranch that I helped manage, it was common that we were constantly replacing shovels. Shovels would just disappear, and people would take them home thinking, "Oh, I'm just taking one shovel," but the shovel didn't belong to them. And with a ranch, it's hard to keep eyes on everybody. You have to really rely on the fact that they're going to be honest, and if they're not, then they just don't have any place working for the company. And I have to be very scrupulous, both in what I'm actually doing and how I appear, because if someone even has the sense that I'm not being completely honest, they'll take that as license to do whatever they want. Mm-hmm. The last two values, which I think are really important, are being humble. I don't care how smart you are, how much education you have, or how much experience you have, you will always come across things that you don't know how to do. And you have to approach it with humility. And one phrase that I hate, because I think it's a recipe for disaster, is faking it till you make it. Instead, get the help you need and get the answers that you need and resolve the issue. If you're faking it, then you're wasting both our time and money, and you're probably going to screw it up. So just be humble and recognize that everybody doesn't know aspects of their job, and they need to ask questions and get help. And the person that actually does that is I recognize that person as somebody who is going to grow in their abilities, and not be someone who will slow their own growth by not being forthright on what they don't know. And lastly, I think it's really important for a leader, much more than anybody else in the organization, to be relentless in pursuing the objections of the company. Passionate, relentless, tireless, run it down, make it happen. Usually, to be successful, it requires some degree of force of will. If we do just what we think is adequate effort to get things done, the enterprise will never achieve its full potential. But if you go for it and you put in all the effort to make it happen, it will succeed. And I have a friend, his name's Dan Schlager, and he started this business. He had very little knowledge of how to run an investment fund. And he was running an investment fund that was new in its space of investing in conservation-based properties. And he worked tirelessly. He was always doing research. He was always writing investor letters. He was always, out in the field trying to figure out, how to make the thing work. He was looking at the markets, and he was just relentless, and his business, which many people poo-pooed early on, that doesn't work, that's not going to work, was hugely successful and spawned an entire industry around conservation-based land investment. And I think it would have failed if it hadn't have been for Dan's persistence. And so just that doggedness is incredibly powerful.
Thank you. Those were all really good insights.
You're welcome.
Who has the next question?
I do. So I had to like look over, I guess my assignment this week was to research on like kind of more of the management of like people, or like a CPO or a CHRO. And so the question that I wanted to ask was like, what are some successes that you've seen in managing your own people at your company?
Yeah, that's a good question. Probably successes and failures, huh? I've had plenty of both, and the successes usually come when you see people grow into their role, and so providing them and empowering them with the resources that they need to be successful. It's always a little tricky to figure out because each person is different. Each person has different skill sets. Most of those skills or weaknesses that they have, you don't fully understand or appreciate when they're first hired. And so being able to tailor the proper resources to their needs is tricky. And yet, if they don't have those resources, then you set them up to fail. And when they fail, then you create a whole new set of potential challenges for that person, not just for the company, but for that person. I'll give you an example. Years ago, I hired a new livestock manager. He had a really impressive resume. He had been, a fairly renowned horse trainer for many years. He had managed cattle herds for several different ranches. And he had a business, an unsuccessful business that marketed kind of specialty beef, in the past. And so, he was older, he's experienced, he had a great resume, great recommendations. We hired him. And, the first thing I asked him to do is to create a business plan for the ranch. On the livestock that would help us to understand how we could move our current livestock approach to one that was more profitable. Or livestock approach at the time was just sort of broke even, and the purpose for him being there was to turn it into something profitable. And I asked him to do it. A few months later, I followed up with him, and I knew he had been busy getting up to speed with the job and everything. And I'm just like, hey, how's that business plan coming? He's like, I just don't have time. I'm always in the field. I said, okay, well, why don't we give you a week off from working in the field, just so you can work on the business plan, which we did. And at the end of that week, I'm like, hey, how'd that business planning week go? And he's like, I'm getting close, but I still need to work on it. I don't know how to deal with this issue and that issue, and I don't know what sort of format to put it in. And so I found some business planning software for him, and paid for him to install it on his computer, give him a format, a template to write it in. And then he went back to work, and the ranch is busy in many different ways, and I just kind of let it go. And after a few more months, I said, how's the business plan? And he says, I'm going to quit. I'm not doing that. You keep hounding me on this business plan. I'm not doing it. You're like a Nazi on this thing. Like, I only asked you a few times. And I think that story illustrates two things that you need to do with employees. One is, I needed to not just hear what he was saying and try to resolve that issue. There was something deeper going on there, right? That I failed to fully appreciate and address. And it was just simply, he wasn't really very good at kind of putting together like this whole business concept. He was great in the field with the animals, but business concept stuff just wasn't his thing. And if I had spent a little more time with him and walked through any of the stuff he had put together, I would have picked that up quickly. But instead, it took almost a year for us to get to the point where I was realizing, what he really needed was, probably someone to pair with him and teach him how to do that part of his business plan. The second thing I learned, which was incredibly important to figure out, was that I actually helped him fail by not following up on him and holding him accountable on a timeline. What happens so often is that you'll give somebody, an assignment, a task, and you'll have them get started on that task, and it's not getting done by the timeline, and you think you're being the merciful guy by saying, I just won't bother them about it. But the reality is, they know that the task is due, and every day that goes past any deadline or timeline that's reasonable for that task to get done, it's eating them up. And they, as all of us do, or normal humans, we then begin to find ways to address those feelings that we have of being incompetent or inadequate or failing on something. And one of the key ways we do that is to rationalize why we can't do it. And that sometimes, and in many cases, that rationalization will reflect back on the person who gave them the assignment. That they've, instead of them being the perpetrator of some problem, they will project themselves as the victim. That you did this to me. I can't believe, you put me in this situation, and who needs a business plan? And, isn't the most important thing to get out there and work with the animals and, get them moving in the right places, and, why you're wasting my time, all of that stuff, right? That's what's going on in their minds that entire time. And so you don't follow up with them, and you think, I'm being the nice guy. But instead, you create this situation in their minds where, to find some way to deal with the fact that they have failed to complete their assignment, they hate their job and they hate you. They don't think you're a nice guy for giving them more time. They hate you. And, I've lost a few people because I wasn't quick to hold them accountable. And I found that those that I have held accountable on timelines, there may have been things that we've needed to resolve, which is fine, but we're able to do it immediately before all of those difficult feelings begin to arise. So a couple of key things, I guess, is give people the resources, empower them, give them give them space to make decisions and choices within their competency, and then give them the resources to do it, and follow up and make sure they stay accountable. It is the merciful thing to do for them.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay.
So my question was, how do you handle difficult employees? Yeah, I think you kind of answered that a little bit on your last question, but yeah, that's my question.
Yeah. Now I think there's a few ways that I approach difficult employee situations. One is, you have to make a decision right away whether the person is going to work or not going to work. And it's okay to let someone move on and to encourage them to move on and terminate them. That's okay. Especially if they're people that lack integrity or that are unwilling, to really work for the better of the company, and they have their own agendas. Maybe they have got some conflicts that are unresolvable. It's easy and best for everyone to move on. But there's a lot of employees that you invest a lot of time and money in. One thing that a lot of employers fail to fully appreciate is the cost associated with training an employee. The cost and time that goes into hiring an employee, the cost and time that goes into training an employee, and all the institutional knowledge that employee has. You're letting that person go. You're essentially swallowing that cost for an unknown employee to come in and hopefully ramp into that position and be better, which you don't know if they're going to be better or not. So you have to make a really thoughtful decision. If you're just firing people right and left, this is stupid. And instead, if you're like, hey, this is something correctable, then you work to correct it. So if you decide it's something that you want to try to correct, first I look at myself. Is there some way that I'm engaging with this employee that's creating the conflict? Have I not given clear instructions? Have I, do they not feel like they're part of the team? Have they been hurt in some way by something that I've done? And I look at that first and try to address it with myself first, because a lot of times that's the case. Is that the reason I think they're a difficult employee is because I've created a difficult employee. Second is, a lot of times what creates the difficulty is structural. It's not a character issue with the employee. It's a way that their work has been structured. And sometimes you can resolve problems structurally. For example, I had an employee who was not very conscious of the expenditures he was making, for his work. And we would just get receipts for reimbursement. And, it's difficult to get a receipt and then say, oh no, I'm not going to approve this. Because the guy's already bought the thing, and it's probably already been used. And at that point, you're gonna make him suck it up and pay for it? I mean, that's a hard knock way to try to correct the problem, right? Is say, I'm not going to approve this $1,000 expenditure. That's one's on you. But clearly, it's something that's got to get resolved. People can't just, without doing a reason cost benefit analysis, start making meaningful expenditures for the company. And so what I realized is we could put in some structural approaches to help resolve that problem. And so, we created an internal purchase order system where, if you're going to make any expenditure, it needs to be approved in advance. And the way that we structured the document seeking the approval required that person to think through each of the aspects of whether the expenditure made sense, right? So I wasn't having to do all that work. Instead, they had to go through it. And my hope was, as they had to do that every time, that they would develop a sensitization to, that this thing may not actually make that much sense. It actually may be more cost than it's worth. And initially it was painful. And it required me to do a lot of, kicking the request back and saying, I don't think you've thought through this. I need more detail on how you've been thinking about that. But over time, that process improved. And I think that structural way of addressing the issue led to success. Sometimes structurally is who they're working with. Maybe you need to just change who they're working with every day. Maybe that's a conflict problem. Maybe it's how they get teamed, whether they're teamed with one other person or they're teamed with 3 other people, or they maybe work better alone. So you look at those issues before you just assume that they're an idiot, or that they lack integrity, or that they are a spendthrift, whatever, and at some point in time, there may be some education that needs to be done about what's proper and improper. And so you've worked through, like, okay, I've tried to change my approach. It's not working. I've tried a structural approach. It's not working. Let's do some more in-depth education to try to help resolve this. I run into this a lot with younger employees, in their 20s, and issues of conflict of interest. So we're a ranch, and there's hunting on the ranch, and there's all sorts of stuff that the ranch, has that people like to do, and they oftentimes will just assume, well, nobody else is up here hunting, I might as well go hunting, or nobody else is doing anything with this leftover bit of koa wood. I'll take it home and do something with it. It won't go to rot. If I just leave it out here, it might go to rot. And you create all of a sudden all these conflicts arise as to, well, did you cut the piece of wood so that it wasn't the right size so that you could take it home and use it?
Yeah.
Are you claiming that hunting needs to be done in order to clear out an area, but you haven't been effective in getting the area free of ungulates for us to do work in there in the past, and you're just creating a hunting area? And so a lot of times that's just educating them on a thought process, and that some of those approaches are just wrong. And it's, coming into being a part of the business world, working for a company. It's not your stuff, it's not like at your house, where nobody's drinking the milk. You might as well drink the milk in the fridge. It does, it doesn't work that way when you work for a company. So education is sometimes important, and I try to work through all of those before I just correct them, where I call them in and call them on the carpet.
Yeah.
And so that's my last resort, because oftentimes they don't hear that if it's your first resort. But if you've done your best to work with them, sometimes you have to just say, look, this has got to stop, and you need to be changing your approach here, or you're not going to be able to continue working for us. But I try to make that the last thing I do. But there's many occasions when that's necessary and appropriate as well.
Thank you. Thank you.
You bet.
Awesome. Should we also ask Nainoa's question?
Up to you guys.
Okay.
I don't even remember which.
Just since we sent this to you already, the question was, what other resources besides yourself do you look to solve problems and come up with creative solutions?
Well, I pray a lot. I think that's something that gets overlooked in making business decisions. I think a lot of people feel like, well, God's not really that interested in whether this company is successful or not. I mean, that's money, that's kind of worldly thing, but we read in the scriptures that God asks us to pray over our fields and, the flocks of our fields, and over our goods, and he wants to help us make good decisions. And I seek his guidance in my work needs, as well as in family and church related needs, my personal life. So don't hesitate to go and ask the Lord for his help. He'll help you. He wants you to be successful. He wants you to learn and grow and to do things according to his will. So ask. Second, I look to a lot of people that I've come across in my time that I believe do their work well. I talked about Dan Schlager, for example. I'll call him and ask him, Dan, how would you approach this? There are other ranchers that I really respect, and I'll call them and I'll say, I need your help with this. And I'm willing to pay for their help. I'm willing to have them come and give me, concerted, focused assistance, consulting, whatever it may be. But I'm comfortable reaching out to others and telling them, I don't know what I'm doing on this issue, help me out. We have a big logging project that's coming up in February, mid-February, and we've been trying to transition to having an in-house crew. We've always contracted it out, and there's a lot of tricky things, from doing proper safety education in the woods, to workers' comp, to the number of hours that are appropriate for someone to be out felling trees. And I just called a friend who's been a lifelong logger and said, I need your help. Help me out here. And I know that with his help, we're going to be successful with the harvest. And he's already helped me plan out a good harvest plan, a good way to approach employing people who are going to work on the harvest. And so other people who have specific knowledge, expertise, don't neglect them in trying to find answers. I do a lot of reading, and I really believe that you have to understand deeply about how organizations work, what you're trying to achieve with an organization, and how that impacts everybody who participates. And so I'm always looking for a greater understanding of that. And so I read a lot. I participate in seminars. I have kind of a unique background. I have a law degree and a Master of Science degree, which gives me kind of two different ways of analytically approaching problems, which, the lawyers are more logicians, right? They use logic primarily as their tool for coming up with answers, and scientists use the scientific process. But there are many ways of knowing, and we have to be open to and understanding how to employ those ways of knowing, and to put them into work to resolve problems.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
You bet.
Okay. I think that's it.
Mm.
I'll upload the video to YouTube and send you guys a link.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.
All right.
All
Thank
right,
you.
good to meet
Thank
you.
you for
Good luck with your
sharing.
class.
Thank you.